Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, Make It Good. I'm Alex and I got a new haircut. Just needed a change, ran the clippers through, no big deal. Anyway, Tim over at Tim Talks Talkies issued a community challenge for the top 25 80s movies. Now this is out to everybody regardless of whether you're a YouTube content creator or not. So I decided to take up the challenge. Now, big thing about that for me, I'm not a list guy. I'm too subjective, I'm too in the moment, too instinctual, so making a list like that is incredibly difficult for me. So I had to come up with a couple of caveats, a couple of sub-rules to this. The first rule to that is one movie per franchise. Some people might think that's not fair, but the thing when it comes down to it is, you know, you take a Back to the Future, you take Ghostbusters, you take Indiana Jones, and the thing is, I just really attach to those characters. Everything is part of the big, you know, the same story for me. So really, I'm just sort of picking my favorite out of that franchise. That's just how it works for me. Second is, how did I come across these movies? First of all, again, very instinctual. It's if this movie came out on television, how likely would I be to stop everything I was doing and just want to watch that movie? So all the movies on my list may not be objectively the best, but you know, it's more of a, I want to sit down and watch it. Has nothing to do with objectivity. And so the last caveat was, you know, if I had to pick between two movies, which one would I want to sit down and watch? And during the commercials, I'd go back to the other one and just sort of catch what I could. That's how it works for me. That's how I made this list. So let's get on with it. All right, so at number 25 is 1982 from John Carpenter, and I've got The Thing. This is the horror movie that for me as a kid just absolutely captured my mind. It was at a time when I was finally ready to start watching gory movies, and it was just so inventive. The premise was just so outlandish, the tension that gets built through it all. I love watching this movie. I love, you know, just sitting through it, and I can't wait to watch the next scene. And so that is The Thing, number 25. All right, number 24 on this list. This came out in 1987. I've got two versions of it on DVD, and that is Evil Dead 2. So funny. This movie I saw with an old friend when I was like 10 years old. We rented it from Blockbuster. His parents let him rent it. This was right at the beginning when I started getting into horror movies, and if it wasn't for the comedy in this movie, you know, just that sort of Three Stooges slapsticky comedy, I probably never would have gotten into horror movies, but this brought me right in, and there you go. Evil Dead 2 is my number 24. Coming in at number 23, this came out in 1986, and that is Haunted Honeymoon with Gene Wilder, Gilda Radner, and Dom DeLuise. I absolutely love this. Has a phenomenal cast. Once again, horror and comedy blending really well together. More on the comedy side than Evil Dead 2 was. My favorite scene in this is when the guy is walking down the wall towards Gene Wilder as he's in bed. Terrifying, terrifying moment if this was a horror movie, but for a comedy, it's one of the best scenes in there. And Gene Wilder's response and his performance right there, best moment of the movie for me. But there are so many great moments. Once again, great cast. And yeah, Haunted Honeymoon is my number 23. All right, coming in at number 22, this came out in 1985, and that is Return to Oz. This is Fairuza Balk's first film that I'm aware of anyway. And once again, this is where we start blending in fantasy, but also horror. And this is just this movie that has always captivated me and stuck with me and also terrified me. There are moments, I mean, talk about the Wheelers at one point, that whole head scene with Ozma. But I love this movie, and because of that inventiveness, because of that production value and the design of everything, I just love watching this movie, and I can't wait to see the next scene. That is Return to Oz. All right, coming in at number 21, this came out in 1989, and that is Little Monsters with Howie Mandel and Fred Savage. Kind of bummed out that I don't have this movie because I love this movie. I think I saw it on TV randomly one day when I was a kid, and I was just captivated with the idea of that sort of spin on the monster under the bed trope. And as a result, you know, the world that they discover underneath this everyone's bed and just how they've connected everyone. I mean, it was sort of a more terrifying Monsters Inc. before Monsters Inc. came out. And I just, once again, you know, you've got an interesting view on something, some horror, definitely a lot of comedy, a little bit of the gross out comedy, but hey, there's nothing wrong with that. And that is why this is at number 21. All right, number 20, this came out in 1987, More Monsters and Kids, and that is, of course, The Monster Squad. First of all, let's just say I love how much they've sort of not only gave love to the classic Universal monsters, but then they also sort of updated them for the 80s. As a kid, I really wanted this to be a whole franchise with the Monster Squad, but you know, ultimately, it's a fantastic movie on its own. Definitely more for like teens and whatnot, more than little kids. But I did see this as a kid, and there were moments that scared the hell out of me. I mean, Dracula yelling at a little girl right in her face. You know what he yells at her. Put some kids in peril, you know, and ultimately, I'm going to enjoy it. So, Monster Squad is my number 20. All right, coming in at number 19, this came out in 1986. This was a comedy classic that's been in my life as long as I can remember, and that is Three Amigos with Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Chevy Chase. I just love the idea of these three bumbling, silent actors that think more of themselves than they really are. I've always loved just the humor weaved throughout and just how clueless they are. And ultimately at the end, they don't, you know, spoilers, they don't save the town. They sort of help the town save themselves through their greatest strengths, which is one thing that I appreciated more growing up than I did when I originally started watching this. Great movie to start out, where there's a lot of jokes that you get when you get older, but you can still appreciate as a kid. And I don't know, I just really like Three Amigos. All right, coming in at number 18, another movie that I should have in my collection and shamefully don't. This is 1989's The Wizard with Fred Savage. Christian Slater's in it. But this is a movie that, you know, I know cynically is sort of just a big commercial for Nintendo, but really at its heart, the story is all about family and trying to keep a family together. You've got, you know, a couple of brothers, one of them who's traumatized after a family tragedy. You know, the mother and father have split up, they're no longer together, and you know, it's this whirlwind of family crisis, but you know, ultimately it you know, it's a road trip movie on top of that, and I just love watching this movie. I you know, I hate to say it, and nostalgically, I love watching the little Nintendo bits get mixed in there, and they're just playing Nintendo all over the place. It's just a wonderful movie. I love to just sit back and you know, just let the scenes unfold, and I just have a lot of fun with it. So yeah, it's number 18. Number 17 on my list came out in 1981. It's the first Mel Brooks to be on this list, and that is History of the World Part 1. I mean, my God, joke after joke after joke, sketch after sketch. There's so much comedy packed into this movie. If you know your history, makes the movie all that much more hilarious. And so, yeah, you can just sit back, you can pick it up at any point in the movie, and something's happening and it's going to be over soon, and then another thing happens. So that is History of the World Part 1, and I love sitting back and watching it. All right, number 16 on this list, I thought I had, and it turns out I don't. This came out in 1988, and that is Who Framed Roger Rabbit with Bob Hoskins. And oh my God, this movie, again, is a movie that I think was just always in my life as far as I can remember. The concept, the pure concept of, you know, these classic cartoon characters just existing in our world and interacting with us is enough to just fall in love with this movie. But it is such a fantastic, when you go back and you rewatch it as an adult, it's a pretty fantastic detective movie at the same time, a noir. And there are so many little hints and clues and bits and pieces that they've dropped all over the movie that ends up to be the final part, you know, the final reveal of everything that's been going on. And it's just a great detective movie, and again, you know, joke after joke after joke, you know, they just cram him in, and it's just a delight to watch. And so once again, at number 16, this is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Come on, Sit back and watch it. It's great. All right, coming in at number 15 is from 1989, and that is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. This was the movie that just sort of captivated me when it came to time travel. They just sort of made up all their own rules. There's no real logic to it. It's just a whole lot of fun, and everything just sort of serves the story. But who cares? Like, that's looking at it objectively. Subjectively, I've just loved the people they picked and how they all come together. And the whole crux of this movie is they just need to pass a test, or else, you know, world peace doesn't get found, you know, doesn't happen. I mean, weird, but I love it. Sit back, watch Bill and Ted. Hey. All right, number 14 on my list came out in 1986. It is one of my favorite musicals of all time, and that is Little Shop of Horrors. Every song in this movie is fantastic. It just delights me so much when they play. I don't know all the words to all of them, but I will try to sing along with them when that movie's going on. Plus, this movie, once again, it's a musical, it's a comedy, also a little bit of horror elements in there, and I'm a sucker when you start mixing those genres up. So, number 14, that is Little Shop of Horrors. Number 13 on this list is probably one of the greatest sci-fi movies of all time to me, but yet not my favorite sci-fi movie on this list. Although if I made a different list, it probably would be higher. Who knows? But anyway, that is 1982's Blade Runner. This is this movie that I can watch endlessly, and I start picking out little bits and pieces. I love coming up with little theories about, you know, whether or not Deckard is a replicant or not. And I find new things every time I watch this movie, and it changes my perspective on how I watch it. So this is a movie I love to just watch and think about, and yeah, Blade Runner. Coming in at number 12 on this list is 1986's Big Trouble in Little China, another movie I really wish I had in my collection and I don't have, and it's really weird. Once again, this is a movie where we're mixing fantasy, a little bit of horror, lots of comedy, action, and it just kind of all comes together in this fantastic movie. One of the things that I've always loved about it, and don't hear really too many people talking about, is that, you know, Kurt Russell's Jack Burton, not the hero of the story. I mean, I know he's like our hero in it, but really when you break down who a hero is and what their trajectory is, it's actually Dennis Dunn's Wang Shi, who is the hero of the story when you really look at it. But it doesn't matter. This movie's a lot of fun. Big Trouble in Little China. Check it out. You've checked it out. All right, number 11 on this list is a movie that not only began furthering a franchise, but immediately turned that franchise on its head. And of course, I'm talking about 1986's Aliens. This was the first horror R-rated movie I had ever seen. I just walked out one night into the middle of the night and turned on HBO, and Aliens was on. But besides that, this is incredibly casted. I mean, you've got Sigourney Weaver coming back, but then you've got like Michael Biehn and Paul Reiser and just so many different cast members that made it into this movie that perfectly embody their roles. Big action, comedy, science fiction. Once again, if you're blending genres really well, in the 80s, you're on this list, and that is number 11. I can watch this endlessly. I love Aliens. Love it. Number 10 on this list is one that is not only near and dear to my heart, but also near and dear to my in-laws. My brother-in-law and I and my wife, we will all just endlessly talk about this movie, and that is from 1987. That is The Princess Bride, also the third Fred Savage movie that's on this list, so feel free to analyze that if you like. But once again, you're a wonderful cast, great writing. The fantasy in it is unlike fantasy that I've ever seen anywhere else. It feels kind of low budget, but perfectly low budget. And I fall in love with this movie every time I watch it. I love quoting it as I'm watching it. Even when I'm not watching it, I'll quote this movie. I don't care. This movie's great. And it's number, what did I say? 10. It's number 10. Number 9 on this list came out in 1988. Is the first movie that made me really start paying attention to directors and composers and people who are not in front of the camera but behind it. And that is from 1988. That is Beetlejuice. Once again, not a movie that I own, but I really should. This look to this movie is so unique. I mean, obviously to Tim Burton's style, but at the time I didn't really know who Tim Burton was, and it just stuck with me, that aesthetic to it. You know, any time I see Tim Burton aesthetic, I just think of Beetlejuice. And once again, a wonderful cast: Winona Ryder, Michael Keaton, of course, Gina Davis, Alec Baldwin, Catherine O'Hara. I mean, God, once again, perfectly cast, but also another genre blender: horror, comedy. You know, you just push them all together. It's also a family drama in some ways. It's a coming of age tale, and it's just a wonderful film that I can just sit back and enjoy. And I also used to have the cassette, the soundtrack to this as a kid, and I would just listen to it. And I'd put this on to go to sleep at night. That's how much I love this movie as a kid, and that is why it's my number 9. Number 8 on this list came out in 1985, and that is The Goonies, which I 100% thought I had on my shelf, and I don't. And I think I lent it out. And if you have it, give it back. But this movie is just, it's a bunch of kids in peril, but having an adventure to save their hometown. And their hometown is the 80s to me. That and the town in E.T. That is what the 80s in my mind is. That look, that feel to a town. And I didn't grow up in the Pacific Northwest, but that was the 80s. And again, you've got a wonderful cast of characters, a fantastic writing, and, you know, I can go in any point in this movie and just, I don't need to see the rest. I can just sit down. I know where it was and where it's going, and I feel at home. And that is why this is my number 8. Number 7 on this list really gave me an appreciation for the craft that is puppetry. I was a big fan of the Muppets. This came out in 1986, and it is Labyrinth. The reason this rates so high on my list is it was just this unique world that was created, and I always loved that. Not to mention you got David Bowie, Jennifer Connelly, and that soundtrack. I mean, those songs would be stuck in my head. I will very often find myself just humming them or singing them while I'm doing the dishes. And that is why this has such a close place in my heart. I love this movie. I love catching it. I will pop it in and just enjoy it. And sometimes I'll just skip to scenes that I like. And that is why this is number 7. Number 6 on this list came out in 1989. It is my favorite of this particular franchise, and that is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. This movie it just starts out as a great Indiana Jones movie. Harrison Ford doing his thing, breaking into crypts to find, to track down his father. And when he finds his father, it becomes a buddy movie, like an adventuring buddy movie. Lots of comedy, and then it's also a comedy of generations having to deal with each other, their different perspectives, and it's just so much fun. And you get to the end of it, and it's so heartwarming, and him just his father reaching out to him, and I love it. It's emotions all over the place, and so that is why number 6 is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. All right, number 5 on this list came out in 1985. Remember that year because it's going to be important, and that's because it's Back to the Future, which of course takes place in 1985. I have always loved this franchise. I love the way that they tie into each other, but this first movie just set everything up so perfectly. It set up their arguably flimsy time travel rules, but that just makes the movie more fun. It's so much fun to talk about this movie in conjunction with the others, as far as like time travel theories and etc. I love discussing this movie with friends who are also into other time travel movies. So Back to the Future rates very highly on my top 25 80s list because it's just really wedged in there. What can I say? Number 4 on this list came out in 1987. One of the funniest movies I have ever seen to date, and that is, of course, Mel Brooks's Spaceballs. Comedy, science fiction, blended perfectly together as the best Mel Brooks movies do. And again, this is just one of those movies that it was so integral into who I was as a child, even though I didn't understand so many of the jokes that were meant for adults. But, you know, I once did an escape room with a bunch of friends, and the highlight of that night was driving home because all we did was quote Spaceballs. Once again, another perfectly cast movie where just everybody fully embodies their role, and it just makes a fantastic watch. And I absolutely love Spaceballs. Favorite Mel Brooks movie, absolutely. Number 3 on this list is another perfectly blended genre movie. You've got some horror, you've got a lot of comedy, some science fiction, and that is Ghostbusters. Fantastic writing, amazing cast. I mean, I don't know if there's any movie more perfectly cast than Ghostbusters. Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, Bill Murray as your Ghostbusters, plus Sigourney Weaver and Annie Potts. And I mean, it's astounding how many wonderful cast members you have in this. And on top of that, great writing and wonderful lines that can just be, repeated endlessly. I mean, I love popping this movie. I love the music in this movie. It's just great. And there we go, Ghostbusters. Okay, the last 2 movies on this list were, when I was building this list, I didn't actually expect them to become the top 2 movies, but the more I got into them and the more I thought about them, I'm like, yeah, they rate higher. Yeah, they rate higher. Yeah, between these 2, I would rate it higher. And so I don't know if this is going to cause controversy or not. I hope it doesn't, because my list. So what are you going to do? Number 2 came out in 1985, and that is Clue. Clue is one of the best scripted movies ever as far as, comedy, but also comedic timing. It feels very much like some of those like older 1940s, sort of 1930s screwball type comedies, just with that snappy dialogue. And they shot themselves in the foot with the multiple endings and having people buy multiple tickets to see those endings. Come on. They should have aired it as we now have it with all of the endings at the end. But it's just a fantastic movie. I love popping this in, watching it with my wife. It's one of her favorite movies. It's just incredible. It has a whole following. There was a documentary, Who Done It, the Clue documentary, that was just so enjoyable to watch. I just can't get enough of this movie. I mean, come on, Tim Curry, one of his best roles, without question. Number 1 on my list is one that's extremely important to me. It's one that if I was not in a good place, I could pop this movie in and immediately be transported. It wouldn't make me forget my troubles, but for 2 hours at least, I could just enjoy this world. And that is from 1988, we have Willow with, of course, Warwick Davis, Val Kilmer, also Joanne Whalley, Jean Marsh, Billy Barty. This movie is just one of those movies that, is just so imaginative. It's just this other world that they've created so perfectly. There are moments that are just very serious and pretty dark, but then there's some light that shines through. And that's kind of why it was always important, was that, as dark as things can get, as bad as things can get, and sometimes they get pretty bad in this movie, there was a way through. And as a result, this movie kind of always, was there for me, so that is why it's my number 1. It's this movie that not only means so much, but it's also quotable. It's also well written. The music in it, still touches me whenever I have that music playing. So Willow, number 1, absolutely. All right, so that does it for my top 25 80s movies. Please, any thoughts you have on these movies in my top 25 list, feel free to put them down in the comments below. Whether you agree or disagree, that's all right. But I don't mind discussing them, giving you my thoughts. If you want to know why I had a movie where I had it, I'll tell you, no problem. As usual, though, watch good movies. I got 25 of them right here. Eat good food. Take care of yourself, someone else if you can. And as usual, make it good. Take care now.